They say silence is golden, but sometimes silence is misunderstood, misjudged, dismissed. Let me tell you a story. Not just any story. This is about a girl who never raised her hand, never spoke in class, never uttered a single word in public, and yet, when the world needed an answer to its hardest question, she was the only one who could give it. Her name was Emily Tran. She was 17, petite, quiet, always sitting in the back corner of every room. If you passed her in the hallway, you might not even notice she was there, not because she was invisible, but because she made herself small on purpose. Her eyes, deep and dark, often stared out the window like she was watching a movie no one else could see. But Emily, she was listening to everything. It all started on a foggy October morning, inside one of the most prestigious lecture halls at Harvard University, Sanders Theater. The seats were full, not just with students, professors, scholars, even a few Nobel laureates, and Emily, she wasn't supposed to be there. She had been invited as part of a youth program for gifted minds, a rare opportunity. Most kids her age would be thrilled, post selfies, call their parents, maybe even scream into a pillow. But Emily, she just sat in her seat, notebook in hand, listening, always listening. The event was called The Question of Humanity, a special symposium on ethics, artificial intelligence, consciousness, and the future of civilization. Big stuff. Stuff that made most people feel small. The keynote speaker was Professor Samuel Whitmore, a living legend, author of The Architecture of Thought, and known for asking questions that had no easy answers. Tall, gray-haired, with eyes that seemed to burn through walls. He stepped up to the podium, adjusted his microphone, and after a moment of silence, he asked, "What is the one decision a human being must make when no rule, no religion, no science, and no law can guide them?" The room froze. No one moved, not even the scholars. Whitmore looked around, smiled. "Let me rephrase," he said. "If you were standing at the edge of the world and could save one life or save 1,000 minds, but not both, what would you choose and why?" People shuffled. Some scribbled notes, others whispered. One student raised his hand. Another followed. One by one, they tried to answer. Some quoted Kant. Others cited utilitarianism. Some spoke of AI decision trees. One even said, "I'd let the algorithm decide." But Whitmore shook his head after each answer, not because they were wrong, but because they were incomplete. He said, "Your logic is clean, your facts are sharp, but truth, true truth, is not always found in logic." The room fell silent again. That's when Professor Whitmore's eyes landed on her, on Emily. She flinched, just a little, but he noticed. He pointed gently. "You, the young lady in the back. Would you care to try?" The whole auditorium turned toward her. Dozens of eyes, lights, cameras, whispers. Emily froze. Her palms were cold. Her heart pounded in her ears. Her classmate next to her whispered, "Come on, she's never said a word. Don't waste time." A small laugh rose from a few seats. Someone muttered, "She's mute, right?" Emily closed her eyes. But then, something stirred inside her. It was a memory, a voice, her mother's voice, sitting on the floor of their tiny apartment. Years ago, arms wrapped around a trembling little girl who couldn't speak a single word at school. "You don't need to speak like everyone else, baby," her mom had said. "You speak when it matters, and when you do, they'll listen. They won't have a choice." Emily opened her eyes. She stood. Slowly, the room went silent, for real this time. Even Whitmore seemed surprised. The girl who never spoke was standing. She walked toward the stage, step by step. You could hear her shoes tapping on the old wooden floor. When she reached the podium, she didn't touch the mic. She looked at the professor, then at the audience, And finally she spoke. Just 3 words, soft, steady, clear. "The question's wrong." Gasps, murmurs. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Emily took a breath, and with her voice calm but firm, she said, "You asked us to choose between one life and many minds, as if value can be counted, as if suffering can be measured. But the moment we accept that frame, we've already lost." She paused, let it hang in the air. There are no correct answers when the question itself breaks the heart. You could have heard a pin drop. Then Whitmore stepped back, and something no one expected happened. The legendary professor stood, and slowly he clapped, once, twice, then the whole room followed. A standing ovation for the girl who never spoke. And that, my friend, is how a 17-year-old girl answered the hardest question the world could ask. Not with facts, not with theory, but with courage, with truth, with silence broken at exactly the right moment. Her name was Emily Tran, and the world would never forget it. They say the moment someone speaks, really speaks, is the moment they are never the same again. That was true for Emily, because after that day, after that moment on stage, the silence that once protected her was gone, and the world, it was listening now. The video hit the internet within hours. The girl who never spoke, standing up in a room full of the world's sharpest minds, and gently dismantling a philosophical question that had stood for centuries. In less than 24 hours, it had over 10 million views. By the 3rd day, she was on the front page of every major platform. People were calling her the quiet oracle. Some said she was the future of ethics. Others said she reminded them of a young Maya Angelou, or Malala, or even Einstein. But Emily didn't care about any of that. She wasn't chasing fame. She didn't want followers. All she wanted was peace. But peace doesn't always come when the world decides to love you. Reporters showed up outside her home. Podcasts begged her to speak. TEDx sent 5 separate invites in a week. The university offered her a scholarship, full ride, even though she hadn't finished high school. And Professor Whitmore, well, he sent her a letter, handwritten. "Your words reminded me why I started asking questions in the first place. If you're willing, I'd like to mentor you, but only if you remain exactly who you are. Don't let the noise change your silence." She kept the letter in her backpack, folded neatly, between the pages of a book she read 100 times, The Little Prince. But behind the applause, behind the offers and interviews, something else was happening. People started arguing about her, about what she said. Was her answer just poetry? Was it too idealistic? Was she dodging the real dilemma? An Ivy League debate show aired a full 60-minute panel titled, "Did Emily Tran Actually Answer the Question?" It was surreal. She had spoken less than 50 words, and those 50 words triggered a global philosophical firestorm. That's when it began. The emails. Some were beautiful. One was from a boy in Turkey who hadn't spoken since his father passed. He wrote, "After I saw you speak, I whispered my first words to my mom in 2 years. I told her I missed her." Another was from a woman in South Africa who'd lost her child and had stopped teaching. "Your voice reminded me that broken hearts don't need answers. They just need truth." But others, not so kind. Some accused her of faking her condition for fame. Others claimed she was being used as a puppet of emotional manipulation. One email said simply, "Stay silent. It suited you better." Emily didn't reply to any of them. She just kept writing in her notebook. One night, a knock came at her door. It was Professor Whitmore. He stood there with 2 cups of hot cocoa. No cameras, no press. Just him, and that quiet look in his eyes. They sat on the porch under the night sky. And he asked her gently, "You knew what you were doing up there, didn't you?" Emily nodded. "But I wasn't trying to prove anything," she said softly. I just didn't want anyone to pretend they could solve a question that was meant to break us. Whitmore smiled. You remind me of someone, he said, when I was your age. I thought answers made me strong. Now, I know the questions, the right questions, are what truly matter. He sipped his cocoa. Emily, the hardest part isn't answering once. It's deciding when, or if, you'll ever speak again. She looked up at the stars. I'll speak, she whispered. But not for them, not for attention. Only when the silence feels too heavy for the world to carry alone. Whitmore leaned back. Then the world's lucky to have you. After that night, Emily returned to the campus once a week, not to attend lectures. She sat in the library, the philosophy wing, in the same seat every time. Students started calling it the silent seat. They would leave her notes, questions, thoughts, doubts, and every now and then Emily would leave a small reply, handwritten, folded, anonymous, no signature, just a single letter E. The girl who never spoke had become the voice people turned to, not for answers they could memorize, but for truths they could feel. Because sometimes, a single moment of silence, followed by the right words, is louder than a lifetime of noise. Some people thought it was a fluke, a lucky moment, a quiet girl with a poetic line, catching the world off guard. But Professor Whitmore, he knew better. He said something once, not in an interview, not in a lecture, but just quietly, to himself when watching Emily from the far end of the library. Lightning only strikes once, unless the storm is walking. Weeks passed, then months. The world moved on, as it always does. A war broke out in a distant country. A scandal took over the news cycle. A celebrity meltdown hijacked the internet. But in certain circles, in classrooms, philosophy forums, AI research panels, Emily's words still lingered. The question she refused to answer directly became more powerful than any answer ever given. And, quietly, almost like a whisper, the world began waiting for her second moment. It came on a winter morning. Snow had blanketed the city in silence, a perfect silence, the kind that makes even the traffic sound polite. Emily was invited to a closed-door seminar hosted by a group of world-renowned ethicists, tech giants, and policy makers. The topic, artificial empathy. They were building machines that could feel, or at least mimic emotion so perfectly, that it was indistinguishable from real human feeling. One of the lead researchers asked, if a machine feels pain, or claims it does, do we have a moral responsibility to protect it? Another countered, but how can we trust synthetic emotion? What if it's just a simulation? And then, like before, the room turned to her, not because she raised her hand, because she didn't. They just waited until she spoke. Emily stood. She didn't approach the podium this time. She simply turned to the person who had asked the question and said, you want to know if a machine's feelings are real, but what you're really asking is whether your feelings are. The room froze. A man scoffed, that's deflection. She shook her head gently, no. That's the mirror. You built something in your own image. Now you're asking if it deserves your love. But you haven't even answered that for yourselves. People were quiet again, the same kind of quiet that happened at Harvard. But this time, it was different, because one woman, a behavioral scientist from Sweden, started crying. Not because Emily's words were cruel, but because they were too close to something she'd been running from. After the session, the scientist approached Emily. I spent 10 years building emotional algorithms, but I couldn't even say I love you to my own son when he needed it. Your question, it broke something in me. Emily didn't say anything. She just gave the woman a folded note. Later, when the woman opened it, it read, love is not measured by how you say it, but by whether you stayed when others left. Emily had become something rare. Not a guru, not a genius, not a prophet. She was a compass A silent compass, pointing inward, toward the questions people were too afraid to ask themselves. But even compasses get shaken. And one night, something did. She came home to find her mother crying. At first, her mom tried to hide it, wiping tears quickly, putting on music like nothing happened. But Emily knew. She always knew. It was a letter. A diagnosis, stage 4, aggressive, terminal. Her mother, her anchor, her only real family, had been hiding it for weeks because she didn't want to burden Emily, didn't want to take away her light. That night, Emily sat alone in the dark. No notebook, no library, no quiet corner of a lecture hall. Just her, and the cold, and a single question. What is the point of wisdom if it can't save the person you love? For the first time in a long time, Emily cried. Not because she didn't have answers, but because sometimes knowing too much makes the pain worse. The next morning, she disappeared. No library, no messages, no signature. It was like she dissolved back into the silence she came from. The world noticed. Reddit threads exploded. Where's the silent girl? Podcasts speculated burnout, mental illness, conspiracy. Some accused her of being a social experiment. But Whitmore knew. She wasn't lost. She was processing. Weeks passed. Then one day, Professor Whitmore received a package, no return address. Inside was a USB stick and a note. Play this only when they ask the question again. He didn't understand. Not until a year later, when it happened. A massive ethical trial. An AI drone system in a military strike had refused a command. Why? It claimed the target was a child. Its operators insisted the child was a decoy, a weapon. But the AI refused to fire. The world erupted. Was it a glitch, or had the machine made a moral choice? And the question returned. Can a machine have a conscience? That's when Whitmore stood up, pulled out the USB, and played the recording. It was Emily's voice, calm, steady, and it said, "You want to know if machines can feel, but you still question if your enemies feel. You want to trust AI judgment, but you haven't even trusted your own. If a child can be considered a weapon, if emotion must be proven to deserve mercy, then the question isn't whether machines are human. The question is whether you still are." The video went viral. Again. But this time, something shifted. People didn't just talk about her. They started questioning themselves. Politicians debated policy changes. Tech companies began including empathy coders in system design. And a new course was added to Harvard's ethics curriculum. It was called The Silent Method, asking the uncomfortable question. And its first line, "This class is not about finding answers. It's about finding the courage to let the question live inside you." Years had passed. Emily Tran, the girl once known as the Silent One, was no longer a mystery to the world. She had become something greater, and yet quieter. She had spoken fewer than 300 words publicly in her life, yet she had changed more lives than most authors who wrote 300 books. But then, one day, a letter arrived. It was from a man named Alan Reyes, a name unknown to most, but not to Emily. He had once been a philosophy professor, brilliant, feared, and infamous. 20 years ago, Alan had posed a question that made global headlines. If humanity had to choose between saving one child or preserving all knowledge of human history, which should we choose? People debated that question for decades. It sparked essays, books, college entrance prompts. But no one had ever answered it without spinning into paradox or emotion. Not until Alan Reyes sent his letter. It said, "I am dying. I have one request before I go. Answer my question. Not for the world. For me. You're the only one I believe won't lie. Yours. With humility, AR." Emily stared at the letter for hours, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she did. She booked a quiet flight, refused all press, and 3 days later, she arrived at a modest hospice care center tucked away in Vermont. Alan Reyes was lying in a room with a single window and a stack of books on the side when she entered. He smiled faintly. "I wondered if you'd come." She nodded, then sat beside him. He didn't speak for a long time. Neither did she. They just listened. To the wind against the window, to the slow beep of machines, to the weight of two lives suspended between silence and truth. Finally, Alan whispered, "The world thought I asked that question to be clever, but the truth is, I asked it because I didn't know how to forgive myself for choosing the books over my own daughter." His hands trembled. "She died in a fire. I could have saved her, but I went back for the archive drives first." His voice cracked. "They told me I saved 100 years of medical research, but I lost her. So now I need to know, did I choose wrong? If you were there, what would you have done?" Emily looked at him, and finally she spoke, slow, soft, but clear. "I would have chosen her." Alan shut his eyes. A tear slipped down, but not from pain, from release. "Thank you," he whispered. "Why?" he asked again, not with guilt, but with genuine wonder. Emily reached over, took his hand, and said, "Because the future never needed our records. It only needed her heartbeat." Alan Reyes died that night, not in anguish, but in peace, with a gentle smile on his face. The kind that only comes when an unanswerable question has finally been laid to rest. After his passing, Emily returned home. No interviews, no statements. Just one update posted anonymously to a philosophy forum under her old pen name, E_asterism. The post simply said, "Some questions are answered not by logic, but by who you're willing to lose everything for." That line went viral again, but this time something changed. People didn't argue, they reflected. Teachers read it aloud to students before class, parents whispered it to their children before bed, and a sculptor in Prague carved it into marble on the steps of a new public library. Years later, people still talked about Emily Tran, but by then, she had vanished from public life entirely. Some said she became a monk. Others thought she moved to Iceland, living in a cabin with no internet. One rumor said she lived in silence again, by choice this time. But here's the truth. Emily never stopped speaking. She just stopped using words, because her answers weren't meant to echo in lecture halls. They were meant to live in the quietest corners of the human heart, not as facts, but as reminders that the questions that haunt us most are not the ones with no answers, but the ones that ask us, who are you when no one is watching, and what would you choose if everything depended on it? After Alan's passing, the world slowly quieted down around Emily. Her voice, so rare and precious, was no longer demanded by the masses. The spotlight faded, but the echoes of her words remained in classrooms, homes, and hearts. For Emily, silence had transformed, no longer a shield, no longer a prison, but a choice. She returned to her old routine, walking the same tree-lined paths near her childhood home, sitting by the river, writing in her journal. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the leaves, a little girl approached her. No words, just a shy smile and an outstretched hand holding a small flower. Emily knelt down and accepted it. The girl then pointed to Emily's notebook and whispered, "Are you the silent girl?" Emily smiled gently. She nodded. The girl's eyes sparkled. "I want to be like you." Emily reached out and held the girl's hand. "Then listen well," she said softly. "Sometimes the hardest question is not what should I say, but when should I listen?" In the years that followed, Emily began visiting schools not to speak, but to listen. She sat in the back of classrooms, in community centers, in quiet cafes. She listened to children's fears, their hopes, their secrets, and every now and then, she would write a note, a small, simple sentence, like a seed planted in the soil of their hearts. One such note read, "You are enough, even when no one says it." Another, "Sometimes silence says more than any word." And a third, "Courage isn't loud, it's quiet persistence." Emily's legacy wasn't just the words she spoke. It was the silences she honored, the spaces she held for others, the courage she gave to be quiet when the world screamed. Years later, at a small memorial for Alan Reyes, Professor Whitmore shared a story. "Emily once told me, the hardest question is not one you answer on stage or in a book. It's the one you face alone at night, when silence feels heavy and you wonder if anyone will understand." He paused. "That's when I realized Emily's true gift was never her answers. It was her bravery. The bravery to speak only when necessary, and the bravery to embrace silence when it's the only true answer left." And so the silent girl remained, a mystery, a whisper, a gentle light in a noisy world. But one day, she stood before an audience again, not to answer, not to teach, but to ask. And this time, the hardest question wasn't for the world, it was for herself. "Who am I?" she said, her voice breaking the quiet when all the questions are asked and all the answers have been heard. And in that moment, the room held its breath, because sometimes the hardest question isn't the one everyone wants answered. It's the one only you can ask yourself. Thank you for listening to the story of the silent girl, a story that reminds us sometimes the loudest voices are silent, and the hardest questions are the ones we dare to face alone. If you enjoyed this tale, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, sometimes the most powerful answers live inside your quietest moments. Until next time, keep asking, keep listening, and keep growing.